A millionaire offered a homeless girl a meal. What she said about her dreams left him speechless. And before we continue, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this. Enjoy the story. The city buzzed with its usual evening chaos. Cars honked impatiently as pedestrians weaved through the streets, eager to escape the biting November chill. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor, mingling with the faint scent of gasoline. Among the crowd, Ethan Maxwell stepped out of a luxurious black sedan, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the pavement. His tailored suit and expensive overcoat marked him as a man of importance, a man who had everything. Ethan had just wrapped up a business dinner at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. His mind swirled with numbers and deals, yet beneath his composed exterior, there was a strange emptiness, a hollowness that success hadn't filled. He tightened his scarf and began walking toward his car, his driver waiting patiently at the curb. As he passed the corner of Park Avenue, a faint voice cut through the bustle of the city. "Spare some change, sir?" Ethan paused mid-step, his brow furrowing. He turned toward the voice and saw her, a young girl huddled against the cold brick wall of a building, her frame barely visible beneath an oversized jacket that had seen better days. She was no older than 13, her cheeks pale from the cold, and her blue eyes startlingly bright against the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. "Spare some change," she repeated, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her appearance. Ethan rarely engaged with such requests. In his world, time was money, and he was always short on both. But something about the girl's tone, a quiet dignity, an absence of desperation, gave him pause. He stepped closer, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler than he expected. "Emma," she replied, sitting up straighter. Her gaze was unwavering, a stark contrast to the way most avoided eye contact in her situation. Ethan's eyes flicked to the small, worn backpack clutched tightly in her hands. "Where are your parents, Emma?" She hesitated, her expression hardening slightly. "Don't have any," she said curtly, then added, "Not anymore." A flicker of something, pity, compassion, passed through Ethan's usually stoic face. "What do you need?" "Just enough to eat tonight," Emma said simply, her tone devoid of the pleading or theatrics he'd grown accustomed to seeing from others in similar situations. Ethan glanced back toward the restaurant he had just left, its glowing windows filled with diners enjoying lavish meals. Without another word, he gestured toward Emma. "Come with me." The pair walked in silence, Ethan leading her to a modest diner down the street. The place was warm, its walls lined with faded photographs, and its air heavy with the smell of coffee and fried food. It was far from the five-star establishments Ethan frequented, but tonight it felt right. They sat in a booth near the window. Emma hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the menu, before cautiously ordering a simple burger and fries. Ethan ordered a black coffee, watching her carefully as she tucked her backpack beside her on the seat. As the food arrived, Emma attacked it with the fervor of someone who hadn't eaten in days. Ethan waited, letting her finish before breaking the silence. "So, Emma," he began, his voice measured, "what's your story?" Emma leaned back slightly, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "Not much to tell," she said with a shrug. "I've been on my own for a while now. I do what I can to get by." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And what does getting by mean for someone like you?" Emma smirked faintly, her blue eyes sparking with defiance. "It means surviving and dreaming when I can." "Dreaming," Ethan repeated, intrigued. "What do you dream about?" She hesitated, as if debating whether to trust him. Finally, she pulled her backpack onto her lap, unzipping it to reveal a small, dog-eared notebook. She flipped it open, showing him pages filled with sketches of buildings, some simple, others elaborate. Notes in small, precise handwriting surrounded the drawings, detailing ideas and concepts. "I want to be an architect," she said, her voice firm. "One day, I'll design buildings like the one you just walked out of." Ethan blinked, taken aback by the certainty in her tone. "That's quite an ambition," he said slowly. "What makes you think you can achieve it?" Emma straightened, meeting his gaze. "Because I have to," she said simply. "If I don't believe in myself, who else will?" Her words struck a chord deep within Ethan, reminding him of the younger version of himself. Hungry, ambitious, and unrelenting. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "But architecture isn't easy. It takes years of training, connections, and money," Emma interjected, her tone sharp. "I know. That's the part one don't have. Yet." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're confident. I'll give you that." Emma shrugged. "Confidence doesn't cost anything." The two sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the diner filling the space between them. Finally, Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a business card. He slid it across the table toward Emma. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the card suspiciously. "My number," Ethan said. "If you're serious about your dreams, call me. I might be able to help." Emma stared at the card, her fingers hovering over it. "Why would you want to help me?" she asked cautiously. Ethan's expression softened, though his voice remained steady. "Because everyone deserves a chance. And you? You remind me of someone I used to know." Emma hesitated for a moment longer before picking up the card. "Okay," she said quietly, "but don't expect me to ask for charity." "I wouldn't offer it," Ethan replied with a small smirk. "Think of it as an investment." As they left the diner, Emma clutching her notebook and Ethan deep in thought, neither of them realized the profound impact this chance encounter would have on their lives. For Ethan, it was the beginning of a journey to rediscover his purpose. For Emma, it was the first step toward a dream that seemed impossible just hours before. The city buzzed on, indifferent to the pair walking down its cold streets. But within that small diner, something extraordinary had been set into motion. Ethan Maxwell wasn't the type of man to dwell on strangers. His world was one of sharp suits, strategic deals, and an unyielding focus on results. Yet, as he rode the elevator up to his penthouse that night, Emma's voice echoed in his mind. "If I don't believe in myself, who else will?" The elevator chimed softly as it reached his floor. Ethan stepped into his sprawling apartment, the city skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was spectacular, a constant reminder of how far he'd come. But tonight, it failed to inspire him. He loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of whiskey, sinking into the leather armchair in his study. On his desk lay the remnants of his evening, a stack of documents from his business dinner, an unread book on leadership, and now Emma's business card. He twirled the card in his fingers, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "One day, I'll design buildings like the one you just walked out of." Her determination had been unmistakable, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, it intrigued him. The next morning, Ethan's assistant, Lauren, found him unusually distracted. She entered his office with her usual efficiency, carrying a tablet loaded with his schedule for the day. "Good morning, Mr. Maxwell. You have a conference call at 9, followed by..." "Lauren," Ethan interrupted, his eyes fixed on the skyline outside his window. "What do you know about homeless youth programs in the city?" Lauren paused, caught off guard by the question. "Homeless youth programs," she repeated, adjusting her glasses. "Yes," Ethan said, turning to face her. "Organizations, shelters, anything that helps them get back on their feet." Lauren frowned slightly. This wasn't typical of Ethan, but she knew better than to pry. "I can compile a list for you," she said. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" "Just do some research," Ethan replied. "Send me what you find by the end of the day." As Lauren left the room, her curiosity was piqued. Ethan Maxwell wasn't known for his philanthropy, at least, not the hands-on kind. This sudden interest was out of character, and she couldn't help but wonder what had sparked it. Meanwhile, Emma sat on a cold park bench, her fingers numb as she flipped through the pages of her notebook. The diner meal from the night before had been a rare reprieve, but her mind was restless. Ethan's card was tucked in the pocket of her jacket, and every time she felt its edges, she wrestled with conflicting emotions, hope and suspicion, gratitude and doubt. Why would someone like and care about me? She muttered to herself, tapping her pen against the notebook. She turned to a blank page and began sketching absent-mindedly, her strokes quick and deliberate. The lines formed the outline of a building, a sleek, modern design with open spaces and towering windows. It was the kind of structure that invited light, warmth, and possibility. A shadow fell across her notebook, and Emma looked up to see an older man watching her. His clothes were shabby, his face lined with age and hardship. "That's some nice work," he said, nodding toward the sketch. "Thanks," Emma replied cautiously, closing the notebook slightly. "You got a dream, kid?" the man asked, taking a seat on the bench beside her. Emma hesitated before answering. "But dreams don't mean much out here." The man chuckled, a rough sound that carried both humor and sadness. "That's where you're wrong. Dreams are what keep you alive. Don't let this place take that from you." Emma looked down at her notebook, the man's words resonating more than she cared to admit. That afternoon, Ethan found himself walking toward the same diner where he had met Emma. It wasn't a conscious decision, but rather an impulse that drew him there. As he turned the corner, he saw her sitting on the bench, engrossed in her notebook. "Emma," he called out. She looked up, startled, her fingers instinctively clutching the notebook. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone a mix of surprise and curiosity. "I could ask you the same," Ethan replied, crossing the street to join her. "Still working on those dreams of yours?" Emma hesitated before nodding. "I guess you could say that." Ethan gestured to the notebook. "Mind if I take a look?" Emma hesitated again, but something in his tone, genuine curiosity rather than judgment, made her relent. She handed him the notebook, watching his face carefully as he flipped through the pages. "These are good," he said after a moment, his voice thoughtful. "Really good. You've got an eye for design." Emma felt a flicker of pride, but kept her expression neutral. "Thanks. It's just stuff I've picked up from books and magazines." Ethan handed the notebook back, his mind racing. "You ever think about taking classes? Learning more formally?" Emma laughed bitterly. "Sure. Right after I figure out how to pay rent, eat, and not freeze to death." Ethan's jaw tightened at her words. "What if someone helped you?" Emma narrowed her eyes. "Why would anyone do that?" "Because talent like yours shouldn't go to waste," Ethan said simply. The conversation stayed with Ethan long after they parted ways. That night, he sat at his desk, drafting a plan. Emma's potential was undeniable, but potential alone wasn't enough. She needed resources, guidance, and most importantly, someone to believe in her. By the time he closed his laptop, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. Across the city, Emma sat in her makeshift shelter, her notebook open on her lap. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of construction noise from a nearby site, a reminder of the bustling city she lived in. The makeshift shelter she called home was little more than a collection of tarps and blankets tucked behind a deserted warehouse. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she had learned to make the best of it. As she folded her blanket and stuffed it into her worn backpack, her fingers brushed against the edge of Ethan's business card. She paused, pulling it out and holding it up to the faint light streaming through a crack in the wall. The sleek design, with his name embossed in gold letters, felt foreign in her rough, calloused hands. "What do I have to lose?" she muttered to herself before tucking the card back into her pocket. At the same time, Ethan sat in his office, staring at a set of architectural blueprints spread across his desk. But his mind wasn't on the project. It was on Emma. Her determination and raw talent had left an impression on him that he couldn't shake. Lauren entered the room, her usual stack of files in hand. "Mr. Maxwell, the reports you requested on youth programs are ready," she said, setting the folder down in front of him. Ethan glanced at the folder, but didn't open it. "Thank you, Lauren. Also, reschedule my meeting with the marketing team this afternoon. I have something else to handle." Lauren raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Understood." Later that day, Ethan found himself walking toward the same diner where he had first spoken with Emma. He wasn't entirely sure why he was there, but a part of him hoped to see her again. To his surprise, as he turned the corner, there she was, sitting on the same bench, her notebook open in her lap. "Emma," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise of the street. She looked up, startled. "You again," she said with a faint smile. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "Still sketching?" Emma nodded, closing her notebook protectively. "Always." "What about you? Don't you have some big, important meeting to be at?" Ethan smirked. "Maybe. But I'd rather talk to you." Emma raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to believe him. "Why?" "Because I see something in you," Ethan said, his tone serious. "Something worth investing in." Emma laughed dryly. "Investing? In me? That's rich." "I'm serious," Ethan replied. "You have talent, Emma. Real talent. But talent alone isn't enough. You need tools, resources, and guidance. I can help with that." Emma's laughter faded, replaced by suspicion. "And what's in it for you? Rich guys like you don't just go around helping people for no reason." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe I want to prove to myself that it's still possible to make a difference. Or maybe I just don't like seeing potential go to waste." Emma stared at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "So, what are you offering?" "A deal," Ethan said. "I'll cover your education, architecture classes, materials, whatever you need. But this isn't charity. Think of it as a loan. You'll pay me back when you're able to." Emma hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. "Why would you take that risk?" "Because someone once took a risk on me," Ethan said quietly, "and it changed my life." The two sat on the bench for a while longer, discussing the details of Ethan's offer. Emma was hesitant, her instincts warning her against trusting someone from a world so far removed from her own. But there was a spark in Ethan's eyes, a sincerity that made her want to believe him. "Okay," Emma said finally, her voice firm. "I'll do it. But don't think for a second that I'll take this for granted." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Ethan replied, extending his hand. Emma shook it, the gesture feeling strangely monumental. It wasn't just a handshake. It was the start of something bigger than either of them could have anticipated. The following week, Ethan wasted no time setting things in motion. He arranged for Emma to move into a modest studio apartment in a safe neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, warm, and a world away from the streets she had known. When Emma first saw the apartment, she was overwhelmed. This is mine," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Ethan replied. "Think of it as your workspace. You'll need a stable environment if you're going to focus on your studies." Emma nodded, still trying to process the kindness. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. A few days later, Ethan showed up at her apartment with a laptop, a stack of architecture books, and a packet of enrollment papers for an online introductory course. "You'll need these," he said, setting everything on the small desk in the corner of the room. Emma stared at the laptop as if it were a spaceship. "I've never used one of these before," she admitted. "Good," Ethan said with a grin. "No bad habits to unlearn." Over the next few weeks, Emma threw herself into her studies. The work was challenging, far more demanding than anything she had ever done, but she relished the opportunity. Her days were filled with online lectures, sketching exercises, and endless reading. Ethan checked in regularly, offering encouragement and feedback. He was impressed by her progress and even more so by her determination. One evening, Emma showed him a design she had been working on, a community center with open spaces, natural lighting, and plenty of room for people to gather and connect. "This is amazing," Ethan said, studying the sketch. "What inspired it?" Emma hesitated before answering. "It's the kind of place I wish existed when I was younger," she said softly. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere that felt like home." Ethan nodded, his respect for her growing even deeper. He realized that Emma wasn't just dreaming for herself. She was dreaming for others, too. But not everyone shared Ethan's enthusiasm. Word of his mentorship began to spread, and some of his colleagues questioned his judgment. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" one board member asked during a meeting. "Investing in a homeless girl? What if it backfires?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm not investing in her because of where she came from. I'm investing because of where she's going." Back in her apartment, Emma worked late into the night, her notebook and laptop both open in front of her. She was exhausted but exhilarated, fueled by the belief that she could finally turn her dreams into reality. For the first time in years, both Emma and Ethan felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. The sound of pencil strokes filled the small studio apartment as Emma worked tirelessly at her desk. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the space. Her once barren room was now alive with sketches taped to the walls, architectural books stacked on every surface, and a laptop humming softly in the corner. For the first time in years, Emma felt a sense of purpose. Each day was a step closer to her dream. Her focus was so intense that she barely heard the knock at the door. Startled, she turned and walked over, peering through the peephole. To her surprise, Ethan stood there, holding a box. "You could have called," she said with a teasing smirk as she opened the door. "Where's the fun in that?" Ethan replied, stepping inside and setting the box on the table. "I brought you something." Emma raised an eyebrow as she opened the box, revealing a set of professional-grade drawing tools, rulers, compasses, high-quality pencils, and drafting paper. Her mouth fell open. "Ethan, this is incredible. But why?" He shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Because you're doing incredible work. And because every architect needs the right tools." Emma's fingers traced the edges of the supplies, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for everything you've done." "You'll repay me by succeeding," Ethan replied, his tone serious. "And by proving everyone who doubted you wrong." Emma's days quickly fell into a routine. She spent her mornings watching online lectures and practicing on her laptop, afternoons sketching designs with her new tools, and evenings researching sustainable architecture. The more she learned, the more her passion grew. But the work wasn't without challenges. There were moments of frustration, when a lecture went over her head, when a design didn't come together, when the weight of everything she didn't know felt overwhelming. One night, as she sat staring at a blank page, Ethan called. "How's it going?" he asked. "Terrible," Emma admitted. "I've been staring at this design for hours, and it's just not working." Ethan's voice was calm. "That's part of the process. Some days, the ideas flow easily. Other days, you have to fight for them. The important thing is to keep going." Emma sighed, but his words gave her the push she needed. She picked up her pencil and began to sketch again, this time focusing on the shapes and concepts that inspired her the most. By the time she set her pencil down, hours had passed, and a new design had taken shape. As the weeks turned into months, Emma's confidence grew. She began experimenting with more complex designs, incorporating sustainable elements like green roofs and solar panels. Her work was no longer just about meeting course requirements. It was about creating spaces that could make a difference. One afternoon, Ethan surprised her with another visit, this time bringing along a guest. "Emma, this is Marcus Avery," Ethan said, introducing an older man with a warm smile. He's one of the top architects in the city. Emma froze, her mind racing. She had read about Marcus Avery in her research. His designs were legendary, blending modern aesthetics with environmental responsibility. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Marcus said, extending a hand. "Ethan's told me about your work. I'd love to see it." Emma hesitated, her nerves threatening to get the better of her. But she took a deep breath and led them to her desk, where her latest sketches were laid out. As Marcus studied her work, Emma fidgeted anxiously. Finally, he looked up, his expression impressed. "You've got talent," he said. "Raw, but undeniable. With the right mentorship, you could go far." Emma felt a surge of pride, but also a pang of disbelief. Was this really happening? "She's already got the work ethic," Ethan said, his tone proud. "Now, she just needs the opportunities." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I'd be happy to help. Emma, if you're interested, I'd like to bring you to one of my firm's workshops. It's a chance to learn from some of the best and to get your name out there." Emma's heart raced. I'd love that," she stammered. "Good," Marcus said with a smile. "I'll send you the details." That evening, Emma couldn't contain her excitement. She called Ethan, her voice brimming with energy. "Ethan, I can't believe this is happening. Marcus Avery wants me at his workshop." "I can believe it," Ethan replied. "You've earned it, Emma. Just remember, this is only the beginning. Stay focused, stay hungry, and don't let anyone intimidate you." "I won't," she promised. But not everyone was as supportive as Ethan and Marcus. At the workshop, Emma found herself surrounded by experienced architects and advanced students, all of whom seemed far more polished and confident than she felt. As she presented one of her designs, she overheard a group of attendees whispering behind her. "Who is she?" one asked. "I heard she's some charity case Ethan Maxwell's mentoring," another said dismissively. The words stung, but Emma forced herself to keep going. She knew she couldn't let their opinions derail her. When the workshop ended, Marcus approached her. "You did well today," he said. "Don't let the chatter bother you. Focus on the work. That's what will speak for you." Emma nodded, his encouragement bolstering her resolve. Back in her apartment, she sat at her desk, reviewing the feedback she had received. For every criticism, there was a compliment, and for every doubt, there was a spark of possibility. Ethan called later that night, checking in, as he often did. "How was it?" he asked. "Challenging," Emma admitted, "but good. I learned a lot." "That's what matters," Ethan said. "Keep learning. Keep pushing. You're on the right track." As she hung up, Emma looked around her apartment. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a space where her dreams were beginning to take shape. For the first time in a long time, she felt not just hope, but certainty. She was on her way. Emma was adjusting to her new life, though adjusting was a generous term. The safety and warmth of her apartment, the steady rhythm of online classes, and the trust Ethan had placed in her were all still unfamiliar. She felt like a tightrope walker, balanced precariously between her past and the future she desperately wanted to build. One afternoon, as she meticulously worked on a new design, a shelter for families in need, her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Busy?" his familiar voice asked. Emma smirked, leaning back in her chair. "Always." "What's up?" "I'm sending a car to pick you up," he said. "We need to talk." "About what?" she asked, frowning. "You'll see," Ethan replied cryptically before hanging up. The car arrived promptly, and Emma found herself whisked away to Ethan's office in the heart of downtown. The building was a monument to modern architecture, with sleek glass panels that reflected the city skyline. Emma had passed it countless times, but had never imagined stepping inside. Lauren greeted her at the reception desk, her expression polite but unreadable. "He's expecting you," she said, gesturing toward the elevator. As Emma ascended to the top floor, her nerves began to tingle. By the time she reached Ethan's office, her palms were damp. Ethan was seated behind his expansive desk, the city skyline sprawling behind him. He looked up as she entered, motioning for her to sit. "Emma," he began, leaning forward, "how's the new project coming along?" "It's good," she replied cautiously. "I've been working on integrating more sustainable elements, like you suggested." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's great. But that's not why I called you here." Emma's stomach tightened. "What's going on?" Ethan sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "There's been some talk from people in my circle. They're questioning whether this mentorship, whether you, are worth the investment." The words hit Emma like a slap. "What?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nothing you've done," Ethan clarified quickly. "It's just the nature of people like them. They can't see beyond someone's circumstances. To them, you're still a risk." Emma's initial shock gave way to anger. "So, are you saying you don't believe in me anymore?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I didn't say that. I'm telling you this because I want you to be prepared. These people will challenge you. They'll doubt you, no matter how hard you work. The question is, how are you going to respond?" Emma stood, her hands clenched into fists. "I don't need their approval," she said fiercely. "I've been doubted my entire life, Ethan. This isn't new. What's new is having someone like you believe in me. If that changes, tell me now, because I'm not wasting time trying to prove myself to people who'll never see my worth." Ethan leaned back, a small smile playing at his lips. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." Emma blinked, her anger giving way to confusion. "What?" "This was a test," Ethan admitted. "I needed to see how you'd handle pressure, and you passed." Emma stared at him, a mix of relief and irritation swirling inside her. "You're impossible, you know that." Ethan chuckled. "Maybe. But you've got fire, Emma. Don't ever lose it." Despite Ethan's reassurance, the doubt planted in Emma's mind lingered. Over the next few weeks, she threw herself into her work with even greater intensity, determined to silence any naysayers. But the pressure began to take its toll. One evening, as she worked late into the night, her laptop froze, erasing hours of progress. Emma slammed her fist on the desk, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "Why am I even doing this?" she muttered. "What if they're right? What if I'm just wasting everyone's time?" She stared at her notebook, its pages filled with sketches and ideas that now felt impossibly far from reality. For the first time since she had started this journey, doubt threatened to overwhelm her. The next morning, Ethan stopped by unannounced. He found Emma sitting on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by crumpled papers and discarded sketches. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Emma looked up, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "I'm failing, Ethan. I don't know if I can do this." Ethan crouched beside her, his expression serious. "Listen to me. You're not failing. You're learning. And learning isn't always pretty." Emma shook her head. "What if they're right? What if I'm not good enough?" "They're not right," Ethan said firmly. "And you are good enough. But you have to stop letting their voices drown out your own." Emma wiped her eyes, his words sinking in. "How do you do it? How do you block out the noise?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You don't block out. You let it fuel you. Let it remind you why you started in the first place." Over the following days, Emma began to rebuild her confidence. She revisited her failed designs, learning from her mistakes and refining her ideas. She reached out to Marcus Avery for guidance, attending more workshops and networking with other architects. Slowly but surely, she began to find her footing again. One evening, as she reviewed her latest project, a community center with innovative energy-saving features, Ethan called. "How's it going?" he asked. "Better," Emma replied. "I think I've finally found my rhythm again." "That's what I like to hear," Ethan said. "Keep pushing, Emma. You're closer than you think." As she hung up, Emma looked at her designs with renewed determination. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever challenges came her way. The rain poured relentlessly, soaking the city streets and washing everything in a cold, gray hue. Emma sat in her apartment, staring blankly at her laptop screen. Her latest project, a competition entry for a sustainable housing design, sat unfinished. The deadline loomed only days away, but she couldn't bring herself to work. The weight of expectations, doubts, and her own insecurities pressed down on her like a lead blanket. Her phone buzzed on the table, jolting her from her haze. It was Ethan. "Hey," he said when she picked up. "How's the competition design coming along?" Emma hesitated, her throat tightening. She didn't want to admit how paralyzed she felt. "It's getting there," she lied. Ethan didn't buy it. "Emma, talk to me. What's going on?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I don't know, Ethan. I feel stuck. Every time I try to work on it, I just freeze. It's like no matter what I do, it won't be good enough." There was a pause on the other end before Ethan spoke, his voice firm but gentle. "Emma, you're putting too much pressure on yourself. This competition isn't about perfection. It's about showing what you can do and learning from the experience." "I know that," Emma said, her voice cracking. "But it's not just the competition. It's everything. The whispers, the judgment, the constant feeling that I don't belong here." Ethan's tone softened. "Emma, you do belong. But belonging isn't something people hand to you. It's something you take. And you're more than capable of doing that." His words brought a small flicker of relief, but it wasn't enough to dispel the storm brewing inside her. The next day, Emma decided to clear her head by walking to the library, a place that had always brought her comfort. She moved through the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of architecture books she had once only dreamed of reading. But even here, the weight of her doubts followed her. She sat at a table, flipping aimlessly through a book on urban design, when she overheard a group of students at a nearby table. They were discussing the same competition Emma was working on, their voices animated and confident. "I'm thinking of incorporating biophilic design elements," one of them said. "Judges love that kind of thing." "I'm focusing on modular construction," another chimed in. "It's trendy and practical." Emma's stomach sank. They spoke with such ease, as if success was guaranteed. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was out of her depth, trying to swim in waters meant for people like them. That evening, as she returned to her apartment, the rain had turned into a soft drizzle. Her soaked shoes squeaked against the floor as she entered, and she dropped her backpack by the door. She sat at her desk, staring at the sketches she had pinned to the wall. They looked uninspired, amateurish. She tore one down in frustration, crumpling it in her hand. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Ethan. It was a notification, a new article about her mentorship with Ethan Maxwell. The headline read, "Ethan Maxwell's Gamble. Can a homeless teen really become an architect?" Emma's hands shook as she read the article. It detailed her background, painting her as a charity case and questioning Ethan's judgment. The words stung, each one chipping away at the fragile confidence she had rebuilt. The next morning, Ethan showed up at her apartment unannounced. He found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by crumpled papers and discarded designs. "Emma," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "What's going on?" She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I can't do this, Ethan. I'm not cut out for this world." Ethan crouched beside her, his expression serious but kind. "What makes you think that?" She held up her phone, the article still open. "This. All of this. They're right. I'm just some homeless girl pretending to be something I'm not." Ethan took the phone from her and set it aside. "Emma, you are not defined by where you came from. You're defined by where you're going. And right now, you're letting these voices distract you from that." "I don't know how to ignore them," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't ignore them," Ethan said. "You prove them wrong." Ethan stayed with her that afternoon, helping her sort through her sketches and ideas. He encouraged her to focus on what inspired her, not on what she thought others wanted to see. "What's the one thing you've always wanted to design?" he asked. Emma thought for a moment before answering. "A space where people feel safe. A place that feels like home." "Then start there," Ethan said. "Forget about the competition. Forget about the article. Design what matters to you." His words lit a spark in her, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of clarity. She grabbed her sketch pad and began to draw, the lines flowing effortlessly across the page. Over the next few days, Emma worked tirelessly on her design. She drew inspiration from her own experiences, creating a concept for a modular housing system that could be easily assembled and adapted to different needs. It was practical yet beautiful, with open spaces and natural lighting that fostered a sense of community. When the design was complete, Emma sent it off just hours before the deadline. She felt a mix of exhaustion and pride, knowing she had poured everything she had into it. The results of the competition were announced a week later. Emma didn't win, but her design earned an honorable mention, a recognition that validated her efforts and reignited her belief in herself. Ethan called her that evening. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Proud," Emma replied. "I didn't win, but I proved to myself that I could do it. And that's enough for now." "That's the spirit," Ethan said. "This is just the beginning, Emma. You've got so much more ahead of you." As she hung up, Emma looked at her sketches pinned to the wall. Each one represented a step forward, a piece of a journey that was still unfolding. She smiled, feeling stronger and more determined than ever. The buzz of excited chatter filled the air as Emma stood backstage at the city's largest architecture conference. The crowd beyond the curtain was a mix of seasoned professionals, ambitious students, and industry leaders. This wasn't just any event. It was the culmination of months of effort. Emma had been invited to present her modular housing concept, the very design that had earned her an honorable mention in the competition. It was her moment to prove that she belonged. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her notebook. She had rehearsed her presentation a dozen times, but now, standing just minutes away from stepping onto the stage, doubt began to creep in. "What if I mess up?" she whispered to herself. "What if they see me as a fraud?" Ethan's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "Emma," he said, appearing beside her, "take a deep breath. You've got this." She turned to him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if I don't?" Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then you'll learn from it and come back stronger. But I don't think that'll happen. I've seen what you can do. Now it's time for them to see it too." His words steadied her nerves, and she nodded, determination replacing her fear. As the announcer called her name, the crowd erupted into applause. Emma stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding but her head held high. The spotlight was blinding, but as Emma began her presentation, she found her rhythm. She spoke about the inspiration behind her design, her vision for creating spaces that felt like home for those who had none, and the importance of sustainability in modern architecture. Her voice grew steadier with each word, and by the time she revealed the final renderings of her concept, the audience was captivated. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the room erupted into applause. Emma exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her as she stepped off the stage. Ethan was waiting for her, his expression filled with pride. "You were incredible," he said. "I told you you could do it." Emma smiled, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "I can't believe it's over." "It's not over," Ethan replied. "This is just the beginning." The conference wasn't just a milestone for Emma. It was also a test. Throughout the event, she mingled with architects and developers, some of whom were skeptical of her background. Their questions were pointed, their tone often dismissive. "So, how does someone with your experience," one man said, his words dripping with condescension, "expect to make an impact in an industry like this?" Emma's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. By focusing on what matters, she replied evenly. Designing solutions that address real problems and bring value to communities. Her response silenced him, but it was clear that earning the respect of some would take time. Not everyone was skeptical, however. As the evening wore on, several attendees approached her with genuine interest. One woman, an award-winning architect, offered to mentor her. Another invited her to collaborate on a community housing project. By the end of the conference, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. The doubts and judgments that had once paralyzed her were now fuel for her determination. Back at her apartment that night, Emma sat at her desk, staring at the sketches pinned to her wall. Each one represented a step in her journey, a testament to how far she had come. She reached for her notebook and began sketching again, her mind brimming with ideas sparked by the conference. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a text from Ethan. "Proud of you. Let's talk tomorrow about what's next." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She set her phone down and continued sketching, the lines on the page flowing effortlessly. The next day, Ethan invited Emma to his office. As she entered, she noticed a blueprint spread out on his desk. "What's this?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Ethan gestured for her to sit. "It's a project I've been thinking about for a while. A housing initiative for low-income families. I want you to be a part of it." Emma's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Completely," Ethan said. "You've proven you have the talent and the drive. This is your chance to apply everything you've learned." Emma stared at the blueprint, her mind racing with possibilities. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Ethan replied with a grin. "Yes," Emma said, her voice firm. 1,000 times yes. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Emma worked closely with Ethan's team, contributing her ideas and refining the design. It was the most challenging and rewarding experience of her life. For the first time, she wasn't just dreaming. She was building something tangible, something that would change lives. But the road wasn't without obstacles. As the project progressed, funding issues and bureaucratic red tape threatened to derail their efforts. There were days when Emma felt overwhelmed, questioning whether they would ever succeed. One evening, as she sat in Ethan's office, reviewing yet another setback, she let out a frustrated sigh. "Why does it have to be so hard?" Ethan looked up from his desk, his expression calm. "Because the things worth doing usually are." His words reminded her of why she had started this journey, to create something meaningful, despite the odds. And so, she pushed on, her resolve unshaken. Months later, as the project neared completion, Emma stood on the construction site, watching as the final touches were added to the buildings. The modular housing units were exactly as she had envisioned, practical, sustainable, and beautiful. Ethan joined her, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. "What do you think?" he asked. Emma took a deep breath, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "I think we did something amazing." Ethan nodded. "And this is just the start. You're going to do so much more, Emma. I can't wait to see where you go from here." As she looked out over the completed project, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. She had faced doubt, fear, and countless obstacles, but she had come out stronger on the other side. And she knew that this was only the beginning of her story. The grand opening of the modular housing project was a scene straight out of Emma's dreams. The site buzzed with activity as local officials, reporters, community leaders, and residents gathered to celebrate. The once empty plot of land was now a thriving community of vibrant homes, each one reflecting the care and thought Emma had poured into their design. Emma stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as children played in the communal garden and families explored their new homes. She felt a lump rise in her throat, a mix of pride and disbelief. This wasn't just a project, it was proof of what she was capable of. "Emma," Ethan's voice called out, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to see him approaching, a warm smile on his face. "You ready?" he asked, nodding toward the makeshift stage where a microphone waited. Emma hesitated, her nerves prickling. I don't know, Ethan. What if I mess up? You won't, he said simply. Just speak from the heart. That's what got you here. She took a deep breath and nodded, stepping onto the stage as the crowd turned to face her. The microphone felt heavy in her hand as she scanned the sea of faces. Good afternoon, she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Thank you all for being here today. This project is more than just a collection of houses. It's a testament to the power of belief, hard work, and the support of those who see potential where others see doubt. The crowd erupted in applause, and Emma continued, her confidence growing. For most of my life, I never imagined I'd have the chance to stand here and speak to you. But thanks to the guidance of people like Ethan Maxwell and the opportunities I've been given, I learned that dreams aren't just for the privileged. They're for anyone willing to work for them. Her voice wavered slightly as she added, this community is a symbol of hope for those who've been overlooked and underestimated. It's proof that no matter where you come from, you can build a future that matters. As she finished, the crowd rose to their feet, the applause thunderous. Ethan joined her on stage, clapping as he leaned in to whisper, Told you you'd nail it. Emma smiled, the warmth of the moment washing over her. After the ceremony, Emma wandered through the community, soaking in the reality of what she had accomplished. She passed a young mother unpacking boxes on her porch and an elderly man watering the flowers outside his new home. Each scene filled her with a profound sense of fulfillment. This is incredible, a voice said behind her. Emma turned to see Marcus Avery, the renowned architect who had mentored her briefly during her journey. He wore an approving smile as he surveyed the buildings. You've created something truly special here, he said. The design is innovative, but it's the heart behind it that makes it stand out. Emma flushed with pride. Thank you. I couldn't have done it without all the support I've had along the way. Marcus chuckled. True, but don't sell yourself short. You had the vision, the determination. That's rare. What's next for you? Emma paused, the question catching her off guard. For so long, her focus had been on this project. Now, with it complete, the horizon seemed wide open. I'm not sure, she admitted, but I know I want to keep creating, keep making a difference. Marcus nodded. Well, whatever you decide, I have no doubt it'll be extraordinary. And if you ever need advice, my door is always open. Later that evening, Ethan invited Emma to dinner at one of the city's finest restaurants, a stark contrast to the modest diner where their journey had begun. As they sat at a table overlooking the city lights, Ethan raised a glass. To Emma, he said, his tone proud, to your hard work, your resilience, and the amazing future ahead of you. Emma clinked her glass against his, smiling. To you, Ethan, for believing in me when no one else did. Ethan shook his head. You didn't need me to believe in you, Emma. You just needed someone to remind you of what you were already capable of. They shared a laugh, the weight of the past months giving way to a lighter, more hopeful atmosphere. Back in her apartment that night, Emma sat at her desk, flipping through her notebook. The pages were filled with sketches from every stage of her journey, some rough and hurried, others detailed and polished. Each one told story, a snapshot of how far she had come. She turned to a blank page and wrote at the top, "What's next?" Below it, she began jotting down ideas, projects she wanted to tackle, communities she wanted to help, dreams she wanted to chase. The world felt wide open, and for the first time, Emma wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. Across town, Ethan sat in his office, reflecting on the journey they had shared. Helping Emma had reminded him of why he had pursued success in the first place, not for wealth or power, but for the chance to create something meaningful. He opened his laptop and began drafting plans for a new initiative, a mentorship program for underprivileged youth, inspired by Emma's story. If one chance meeting could lead to this much impact, he thought, imagine what could happen if more lives were given the same opportunity. As the city lights glittered against the night sky, Emma and Ethan both felt the same thing: hope. Their journey together had been filled with challenges and triumphs, doubts and discoveries, but had also shown them the incredible power of believing in someone, and the ripple effect that belief could create. This wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning of something even greater. And now, I want to hear from you. Which part of this story touched your heart the most? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. And of course, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more narratives like this. Each subscription helps us continue bringing exciting stories to you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.